Hey everyone, Noir here. Let's get into today's Reddit story.
My name is Brooke Whitmore, and I am 35 years old. Just minutes after my divorce became official, I called my father. "Fire all 27 employees my in-laws planted in the company," I said while standing on the courthouse steps, still holding the manila envelope with the judge's signature barely dry on the final divorce decree. My hands were shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my phone twice before he finally answered. My father, Richard Whitmore, founded Callaway Steel Fabrication in 1987. He started with nothing more than a single rented warehouse and built it into one of the largest structural steel suppliers in the region. On my 30th birthday, he gave me 25% ownership of the company, telling me it was mine to grow, mine to protect, and mine to carry into the future. I married Nathan Crawford 8 years ago, and from the very first family dinner, his mother, Evelyn Voss, made it obvious that she viewed my father's company as something her family could benefit from, not something I had worked to earn. She never came right out and said it. Instead, she made comments like, "Family should take care of family," and "Nathan's cousins are so talented. It would be a shame not to give them an opportunity." As the years passed, one by one, Voss relatives and people personally chosen by Evelyn filled positions throughout payroll, logistics, procurement, and even our internal audit department. My father trusted me completely, and because he believed our marriage had joined both families together, he approved every person I recommended without questioning why so many of them happened to be connected to my husband's family. It took me 6 years to realize what was really happening. At first, the signs were easy to overlook. A shipment invoice would disappear. Then I noticed a vendor contract quietly transferred to a company registered under Evelyn's maiden name. After that, much larger steel orders that should have required 3 separate approvals somehow moved forward with only one signature from Nathan's cousin, Garrett, who was in charge of procurement. Then there was Logan Pierce, another member of the Voss family working in logistics. He kept rerouting shipments to a second warehouse that, according to company records, did not officially exist. The first time I mentioned my concerns to Nathan over dinner, he laughed and told me I was imagining things. He said I was seeing conspiracies where there was nothing more than family helping family. When I brought it up again a few months later, his attitude completely changed. He became cold and distant, accusing me of being ungrateful after everything his mother had supposedly done to help our business succeed. That was when I quietly hired a forensic accountant. I paid her in cash, and twice a week we met at a coffee shop about 40 minutes away from home so nobody would recognize us together. It took her 11 months to untangle everything. In the end, she discovered that 27 employees, all connected to Evelyn Voss through blood or marriage, had been placed throughout every major department in my father's company. Together, they had quietly siphoned nearly $4 million over 6 years using inflated invoices, fake consulting payments, and a shell logistics company that billed us for warehouse space which was actually nothing more than an empty lot behind a strip mall owned by Evelyn. I never confronted Nathan with the evidence. Instead, I quietly filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and left the accountant's report sealed in a drawer until the divorce became final. Some people might call that cowardly. I call it patience. The moment I was legally free from every connection to Nathan and his family, I could finally act without guilt or hesitation. Standing on those courthouse steps in the gray blazer I had chosen because it reminded me of the chief executive officer I should have been all along, I called my father and explained everything. In just 4 minutes, I told him about the shell company, the fake invoices, the warehouse that never existed, and the entire scheme that had been operating inside our business. Then I gave him one instruction. "Fire all 27 employees my in-laws planted in the company, effective immediately. Have security escort every one of them out before the end of the day." My father stayed silent for a long moment before finally saying just one thing: "Send me the report." Within 20 minutes, our human resources director had the complete list of names. Less than 2 hours later, the terminations had already begun. Thank goodness I acted when I did, because that same evening, while I was still unpacking boxes in the small rental house I had moved into during the separation, my former mother-in-law showed up at my front door. Evelyn Voss, a woman who had never once raised her voice during 8 years of forced smiles at family holidays, pounded on my door so hard that my neighbor's porch light switched on. The moment I opened the door, she started shouting before I could even speak. Her face was bright red, her voice was shaking with rage unlike anything I had ever seen, and she demanded that I reverse every single termination immediately. Then, standing there in front of my new neighbors, she swore before God that if I refused, I would regret ever being born into a family that dared to take away what she believed rightfully belonged to her. I stood in the doorway of my house as the evening light slowly faded, watching Evelyn Voss practically tremble with anger. For 8 years, I had done everything I could to avoid seeing that side of her, but this time I felt completely calm. "You need to leave my property," I said. My voice was much steadier than I expected. She let out a short, bitter laugh and told me I had no idea what I had just done. According to her, Nathan's family had helped build half of what my father proudly called his company. She reminded me that all 27 employees I had fired had families depending on those paychecks. In her words, I was destroying innocent lives simply out of spite. I looked her straight in the eye and told her the only thing that had been destroyed was my father's business. It had been slowly drained for 6 years, and every bit of it was documented in the forensic accounting report waiting in my attorney's office. For the first time, I saw her expression change. It was only for a split second, but beneath all the anger, I caught a flash of fear. Right then, I knew she understood I had real evidence and that I was not making empty threats. The moment she realized intimidation was not going to work, she completely changed her approach. Her voice softened, just like it always did whenever she wanted to manipulate someone. She told me Nathan still loved me. She said everything could still be fixed if I reconsidered the divorce, gave everyone their jobs back, and agreed to forget the past for the good of the family. I almost had to admire how quickly she switched from threatening me to pretending she cared. It took her less than half a minute. I told her there was nothing left to reconsider. My divorce was final. The 27 terminations were final. And if she, Garrett, Logan Pierce, or any of the other employees wanted to challenge their dismissals, they were free to do it in court. If they did, the forensic accounting report would become part of the public record for everyone to see. That was when she stopped shouting and started talking about lawsuits. She claimed she had powerful connections and promised this fight was far from over. I did not argue with her anymore. I simply closed the door. The weeks that followed were more difficult than I had expected. It was never because I questioned my decision. The real challenge was undoing 6 years of corruption that had spread through nearly every important department in the company. We were forced to rebuild entire teams almost from the ground up. My father hired an experienced operations manager named Douglas Mercer to oversee procurement and logistics while we carefully screened replacements. The results came almost immediately. Within the first month, shipment delays that had frustrated us for years practically disappeared. Vendor costs, which had somehow kept climbing without explanation, dropped by almost 18% as soon as we canceled the shell company contracts and replaced them with legitimate agreements awarded through competitive bidding. That first month, my father called me almost every evening. Sometimes he did not call to talk about anything except the latest financial numbers. Each conversation sounded different from the last because his voice grew lighter every time. It was like listening to a man slowly realize that a burden he had carried for so many years had finally been lifted from his shoulders. Nathan called me only once. It happened about 3 weeks after his mother confronted me. His voice was quieter than I had heard in years. He never tried to defend Evelyn. He never mentioned the 27 employees who had been fired. Instead, he simply asked how I was doing. For just a moment, I heard the man I had married instead of the man his mother had spent years shaping into someone else. I told him the truth. I said I was happier than I had been in years. I truly meant it. He never contacted me again. The lawsuit Evelyn had threatened never happened. After her attorney reviewed the forensic accounting report that my legal team provided during discovery, he quietly advised her that filing a lawsuit would likely expose her family to a criminal fraud investigation. Almost overnight, all of the legal threats disappeared. Within 2 months, Garrett and Logan Pierce had both left the state. Before the end of the year, the shell logistics company Evelyn had used to bill us for a warehouse that never existed was officially dissolved, most likely in an attempt to erase the paper trail before investigators could dig any deeper. My father decided not to pursue criminal charges. It was not because we lacked evidence. We had more than enough. He simply told me that seeing them lose everything they had built on stolen money was punishment enough. Dragging the company through years of criminal trials and newspaper headlines would only damage our family name even further. I understood his reasoning, even though a part of me still wanted them to face more serious consequences. 6 months later, Callaway Steel Fabrication reported the strongest quarterly profits in the company's history. Every department was now staffed by people who had earned their positions through hard work instead of family connections. The following spring, my father officially named me president of the company. He made the announcement while we stood on the same warehouse floor where he had started the business nearly 40 years earlier. Looking out at all of our employees, he said the company had finally been returned to the people who had truly built it. I stood there wearing the same gray blazer I had worn the day my divorce became final. For the first time in years, I felt like both my life and the company finally belonged to me.